This is an NBC News special report. Here's Savannah Guthrie.
Hi there, good morning. We're coming on the air with breaking news out of the Supreme Court. Big implications for reproductive rights. The justices unanimously right now upholding changes to regulations regarding the abortion pill, mifepristone. But it says that they can stay on the market as is. There was a challenge by a group of doctors who asked the court to restrict access. I'm joined now by Laura Jarrett, our senior legal correspondent, as well as Danny Savalos. So this is a case that was tossed out essentially on technicality or the issue of standing, whether this group of doctors had standing, had the right to sue. And the bottom line is this expanded access in 2016 and 2021 for the abortion pill mifepristone, that expanded access can stay as is.
Yeah, so let's back up just a little bit. This was a group filed by essentially anti-abortion advocates and doctors who wanted to take the pill off the market completely. It's been winding its way through the federal courts for the better part of a year now. But here the high court has said that it was going to stay on the market as is. In other words, no change to the pill. The most urgent piece of this was whether the pill would be unavailable by mail, which has been a huge thing. And obviously, it's the most commonly used pill in the entire country. And that would have been a huge restriction. But today, the court saying they don't even need to reach that issue because the group that sued doesn't have standing. That means they don't have the legal right to sue. These were people who didn't want to use the pill. These are doctors who never wanted to prescribe the pill. These were people who just objected to it and said that the FDA didn't do enough to look at the safety issues around the drug. By the way, the FDA says the drug is incredibly safe and has very little side effects. The court doesn't need to reach that issue because of the standing. And it would have had enormous implications, not just for the abortion pill, which is so widely used, but for every FDA-approved drug. That's why the Biden administration was fighting so hard to keep it on the market. So we're going to work our way through the decision, but we should mention it is unanimous.
Yeah, so this is in 2000, this pill was approved by the FDA, but in 2016, Danny, and in 2021, the Biden administration expanded access, so you didn't have to go to the doctor personally 3 times and so forth. And then, as Laura mentioned, made it available via telehealth in 2021. The court did not reach the merits of the FDA's decision, simply stating that this group of doctors who sued did not have the legal right to sue.
Standing is a constitutional requirement. It really asks the question, does the plaintiff have any business or any real interest in this outcome? Can the court even offer relief to this plaintiff? Or is this plaintiff just somebody, a citizen, who just cares about something, but it doesn't really affect them? And it really answered a very interesting question, which was posed by the plaintiffs, which is, well, if we don't have standing, what if nobody has standing? What if nobody can ever challenge FDA in court like this? This came up at oral argument, which was, I would say, mostly devoted to the issue of standing more than the merits. And what's an interesting conclusion by the court in this opinion is that there will be times when nobody has standing to challenge something like FDA. And the solution may not be the courts. The solution may be the political process or some other avenue, maybe even internal review by FDA itself. But a very interesting holding within this opinion is that sometimes there is no standing to challenge an FDA action or something else.
So if you don't like it, you may have to petition Congress to do something about it legislatively. I want to turn to Hallie Jackson, our senior political correspondent, of course, watching all of this and this issue of reproductive rights. This abortion case just decided by the Supreme Court. I should mention there's another one pending for the Supreme Court, and we may get more decisions as we speak. The court's still meeting. This has broad implications for the campaign trail.
It does, because Democrats have sought to make reproductive rights, Savannah, front and center in this campaign for president come November. It was a hugely mobilizing issue for voters back during the midterms, the months after the Supreme Court overturned that landmark abortion rights ruling Roe versus Wade. And since then, you have seen Democrats push this again and again. Even today, for example, there's a vote in Congress that would seek to enshrine protection for IVF, for example. Obviously, a key way in vitro fertilization that many women end up having babies in this country. Largely seen as a messaging bill, but it's an indication of the spotlight that Democrats want to put on this, with Vice President Kamala Harris really leading the charge for the Biden campaign on this. Now, Republicans, in some ways, have been on the back foot as some conservatives have sought to continue to put restrictions on access to abortion, and that is partly why this mifepristone case was being so closely looked at. If you look at some of the numbers, where do Americans stand on this? The majority, 63%, according to some recent numbers, favored keeping access to mifepristone. So this is something where the court now is aligning with where the majority of Americans are. It is unlikely to make this issue go away come November because it is still, in the eyes of Democrats, something that they think can get their people out to the polls. On the flip side of the spectrum, you have Republicans now seeking to walk kind of a line. The Roe versus Wade getting overturned was a fight that, as you know, Savannah, had been decades in the making for conservatives. Once they got there, the question became, what's next? And importantly, what would be politically palatable for Americans moving forward, considering how widely popular access to contraception, for example, is for a lot of folks. So a very significant ruling. I'll tell you what I'm waiting to see is any reaction, obviously, from the FDA here on this, significant for them. And in addition, any political reaction, too. Former President Trump is here in Washington. He is back near the Capitol for the first time since January 6th. President Biden, of course, is overseas, but this is going to have an impact come November, Savannah.
And we'll check in with Peter Alexander in just a moment, who is, of course, traveling with the president. But I want to go to you, Laura, because it's very interesting to see a unanimous opinion of the court here.
Yeah, and because it's unanimous, you know, there's got to be some grounds that they can agree on that has nothing to do with abortion, and standing allows them to do that. As you mentioned, they still have another hot-button abortion case on their table. This is 2 years after they had the Dobbs decision, which took away the right to an abortion. But it is interesting because you can think of this case as saying there are limits to what people can do to try to restrict abortion rights, right? There is some still limits, even though you don't have a constitutional right to an abortion here. And that standing issue is really key for them. And I just want to read a little bit of how they articulate. The plaintiffs, doctors, and medical associations are unregulated parties who seek to challenge the FDA's regulation of others. So not of them. These are people who, again, never wanted to prescribe mifepristone. Because plaintiffs do not use mifepristone, they obviously can suffer no physical injuries from the FDA's action relaxing regulation of mifepristone.
And the doctors here were trying to say, look, if we have to prescribe this, then we are an injured party, and the court didn't buy that.
No, and they never came up with a doctor who said that they had to do that. In fact, there are other regulations already that protect doctors who don't want to prescribe.
We'll give them a conscientious objection if they want to, so they'd never be in that position.
Exactly. So if a doctor says somebody comes into an emergency room, they don't want to have to prescribe mifepristone, they don't have to. Another one of their colleagues can do that, and that obviously factored into their reasoning as well.
Well, they seem to make quick work of it in terms of the decision and the unanimity of it. Let's go to NBC's chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander. Correct me, he's at the White House in Washington this morning, not traveling with the president. The president is overseas at the G7. Yep. But how do you expect the president and the administration to react to this?
Yeah, just back from traveling with the president, who, as you note, is now at the G7. But this issue, having just spoken to a top campaign official with the Biden-Harris campaign, is going to be a major focus for them going forward in the course of that campaign. This campaign, we have witnessed that already. Recognize that the anniversary of the overturning of Roe v. Wade is June 24th. What are we now? Barely a week and a half away from that anniversary. The White House, the campaign, already making plans to mark that date, a date that they say had a major impact on women and, frankly, men, on families in America, their inability now to have the protected right to have an abortion. So mifepristone was a top priority for them to do everything in their power to try to make that available to women as necessary. You know that abortion medication accounts for more than half of all abortions that are performed in the United States right now. It's a point that the vice president in particular has hammered home. She has really been on the leading edge of this effort for the campaign, traveling routinely on this topic. It's one that they believe resonates particularly with women and also with younger Americans. The first time for Americans, a lot of these Americans, certainly for younger Americans, that they had seen a right that they had taken away. So this all plays into what the White House, the campaign, really views as one of the sort of major focus points for them going forward. Recognize the debate comes up on June 27th, so just a matter of days after that Dobbs anniversary. And the White House, as we have heard repeatedly from those top advisors to the president and some of his top advisors in the campaign, they see really three major issues that they want to focus on going forward. Obviously, the topic of democracy. The president has made that a major focus. This issue of reproductive rights and the economy, as they describe it. Who is looking out for the middle class in America right now? Who is on their side? This is right at the heart of the campaign's efforts, and I think you're going to hear them leaning into this very heavily over the course of this day and in the weeks to come.
All right. Peter, thank you. Stand stand by there. I want to bring everyone into the process here. The Supreme Court is sitting right now in Washington and releasing opinions, and we don't yet know if it's completed its work for today. It's now moved on from the abortion case we've been mentioning onto another case, and I've got our legal correspondents right here. We're following several cases of interest, and just so folks maybe don't know, there's just a couple of weeks left in the court's term, so they're right at the end of the semester, and they got to get all their homework in. But we're awaiting a significant case on another one on abortion, a couple of gun rulings, and the immunity issue.
Yes.
Donald Trump, who of course is being prosecuted for his actions related to January 6th, is arguing complete immunity from criminal prosecution. That's on the court's docket too.
Yeah, and the special counsel Jack Smith there had asked for expedited treatment. They had asked for the court to issue its opinion as quickly as possible. They heard oral arguments on that way back in April, and they know how to issue a decision fast when they want to. In Bush v. Gore, they did it the very next day. They're obviously not doing that in the immunity case.
Well, they were given an opportunity to fast track it back in December, declined, took the case, but even then has been holding it, has not reached a decision on that.
Which is effectively a win for the former president because of the timing. He's doing everything, obviously, and they've not made a secret of this, to try to delay when it comes to that immunity decision. And just to get everyone up to speed, the immunity decision will make or break the case, because if he's immune, then the whole thing goes away.
Well, in all the federal cases, because even though it's not at issue in the one before the court right now, there is another federal case having to do with the mishandling of classified documents. If the court were to issue a broad ruling, Danny, and say, okay, the president is immune from any official act, well, wouldn't the immunity, wouldn't it also potentially, even though it was post office, apply there too? And
that's the key. Trump is arguing for immunity for official acts. And even at oral argument, they conceded that private conduct could be prosecutable. So in an immunity decision that grants immunity for official acts and could potentially procedurally return the case to the district court for a finding, for a sifting through to figure out what acts are official and what acts are purely private. Notably, at oral argument, Trump's attorney conceded that there were several different instances in these indictments that would be purely private conduct. So I expect that whatever the immunity decision will be, it will not be all immunity in all instances for former presidents, but it also will not be never immunity ever, ever for present or former presidents. So I expect it's going to be somewhere in the middle.
As is often the case, the court is grappling with a decision that applies to the facts before it in that particular case, but also with an eye to the precedent that it's sending. I want to go to Hallie Jackson right now, because on this subject of the Trump's legal cases, this is obviously a huge issue when that immunity decision is made in terms of his campaign, whether or not this January 6th federal prosecution goes forward. How is the president handling these legal issues on the campaign trail?
He's using them, or trying to use them, Savannah, to his advantage in every way that he can. Former President Trump fundraising off of this repeatedly, even as recently, obviously, as this week. He has largely framed this as the weaponization of the system against him here. And this is something that, when you're looking at rallies, when you're looking at people on the ground in some of these critical battleground states, they are, in large part, many of these Republicans, echoing that claim that the former president has made. He is hoping that this does for him in the general what it did for him in the primary election, which is rally his base around him. We saw that these legal issues, just objectively, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the fundraising statistics, if you look at where his polling was, it rocketed him to the top of the pack, a pack that he was already solidly ahead of during the Republican primary. The big question mark has always been, is this going to be an effective line for some of those persuadable independent voters in some of these critical battleground states, not necessarily parts of former President Trump's base? Will they hear that and like it, or will they be turned off by it, Savannah?
Let me jump over to Peter Alexander, who has a reaction from the White House to this decision on the abortion pill.
Yeah, we anticipate a statement from the president coming momentarily, but let me just tell you now we have the first formal statement coming from the Biden campaign, a top advisor telling me, in their words, it would be, quote, a devastating mistake for voters or members of the media to take away from today's ruling that medication abortion is now safe from MAGA attacks. And this is a preview of what we're going to hear. They say, if given the chance, Donald Trump will ban medication abortion nationwide. In fact, his allies have a plan to do so using executive actions that would circumvent both the courts and Congress. Those are words of the Biden campaign. Again, as we just said in our first conversation here, they're going to lean in heavily to this issue. They believe it's an issue that is very salient, that impacts real Americans and their lives and their family decision making. And this is one that they want to lay at the feet of Donald Trump in particular, because he put 3 individuals on the Supreme Court while in office that helped overturn Roe v. Wade, again, with that anniversary now just a week and a half away. Savannah.
All right, Peter, thank you to all of our panelists. We thank you. We'll continue our special coverage of the Supreme Court, but just as a reminder, the decision today upholding the expansion of the use of the abortion pill in a win for the Biden administration. Unanimous decision. We'll have more for the rest of you. Today continues.